Hello and welcome back, and today I want to look at a QNAP and a Synology rack mount. I've got two devices here in front of me. They are both technically half-depth rack mount chassis, and they are designed for SMB users, small medium business. Now, I compare a lot of NAS devices on this channel, arguably quite a lot from these two brands here, but I've really been looking forward to this one. I had to wait quite a while to get my hands on one of these, the RS1221 Pluses, because it's a very recent release, and it has arguably been said that QNAP have beaten a lot of the brands to the punch with a lot of the hardware architecture with this Ryzen. But like a lot of the things that happen in these industries, particularly from these two brands, we have two brands, one that's a little bit safer, a little bit hesitant, but ultimately brings a very slick, branded and polished product. And you have another brand that will get there first, but over the time of its release will then hone off the edges and then provide an ultimately more customizable product. And just like all of my other comparisons, these two are very much part of that mold, with a few exceptions today. Now, today we are looking at, as mentioned, the Synology RS1221 Plus, available in both a standard and a redundant power supply model. We are looking at the RP, the redundant model, today, and we're comparing it against the late 2020 release QNAP TS-873AU. Again, we have got the redundant power supply version here, but there is a non-redundant version as well. They're both 40 centimeters deep, but there's a 30 centimeter recessed PSU version of both of them. Now, straight away with these two devices, it's worth highlighting these are, of course, rack mounts. So some things that we're not really going to cover in this video, like noise. We are going to boot these up in another video where we're going to do audio testing for a different subject that's coming very, very soon. We're doing a huge noise and ambient environmental series of videos. But these are devices, because they're rack mount based, they are going to make a bit more of a racket. And even though, even now in 2021, the appeal of rack mounts has moved away from just business to a lot of prosumers due to the shape and form factor of these devices, the fantastic cooling featured on a number of them, and the upgradability of rack mounts over a lot of desktop devices. And the appeal of rack mounts such as these mid-range rack mount at SMB has never been greater than it is right now. So, what can we talk about with these two devices? Well, let's tackle that big subject straight off the bat. I'm sure the specs have already appeared on screen, but let's talk about the price tag. And this is something that really surprised me when these two both arrived on the scene, because for a unusual like-for-like basis, we're making these comparisons here. The QNAP is the more expensive, and by a noticeable degree. Now, of course, the time at which you're watching this in the future may dictate those prices and how they change, but at launch right now, the RS1221 Plus non-RP is $1,000, and the redundant power supply version is $1,350, give or take, without your local tax. The QNAP, on the other hand, arrives at $1,450 for the non-RP version and $1,700 for the redundant power supply version, again vaguely and without the tax in your local region. That is a noticeable dip of £300 to £400 between these two devices and revisions. So already off the bat, it's one of those rare occasions where I can say to you, the Synology is the more cost-effective of the two. You are getting a lower price point there, which you can then divulge into upgrades that we'll talk about later on, divulge into capacity and lots of other options there. At the end of the video, we're of course going to be talking about software, and I'm pleased to say that both of these two devices bring the full complement of their respective brands' applications and services to the forefront, and with support of the entire gamut of their applications. But as you go through this video, one of the things I want you to bear in mind is that these are complete solutions. Both of these represent a hardware and software equipped purchase for your business, but of course prosumers as well. And although we are of course going to run the standard Plex media server tests and home revision stuff, we are also going to look at these as complete business solutions that your purchasing manager, you've been let know by IT that you have to buy something, and you look at it, take my word for it, these are solutions that arrive with all the hardware, apart from hard drives, of course, and they arrive with all the software for your CRM, CMS systems, for communication between all your teams, for file sharing, file backup, surveillance, and more. But let's talk about that price point a bit, that big change of strategy there between these two, because it has to be said, in most regards, when you look at solutions from Synology or QNAP, you generally find that the QNAP is the lower price of the two, or if not the lower price, they arrive at the same price, but the QNAP has more hardware inside. So with that QNAP arriving with that higher price tag, the first thing we want to know is what exactly is this bringing that this one isn't, because that is a noticeable price difference. So that leads us into hardware. Now, another reason why I'm comparing these two devices, frankly, is because of their hardware similarity. Of course, they are both half-depth 8-bay rack mount devices supporting SATA hard drives up to the current 18 TB standard in the Seagate Iron Wolf and WD Red series. There's also UltraStar and there is Exos. Synology themselves, of course, have unleashed their own range of hard drives that we're doing a full overview of and testing and more, going up to 16 TB currently, and of course they're compatible on these systems. So again, on the storage level, very, very similar. Identically, neither one of them have M2 NVMe upgrade slots inside, generally something you find in one brand or the other, and both of them require an upgrade that I'll talk about later on. They both have exactly the same CPU inside as well, that great Ryzen embedded SoC that we keep talking about there, the V1500B, a quad-core 2.2 GHz processor. Now, that CPU, x86 64-bit, although it doesn't have 4K transcoding and embedded graphics to get any of that sort of stuff done, it still has more than enough horsepower and processing ability to deal with virtualization, to deal with widespread surveillance, to deal with all of the graphical manipulation of data that is required in modern NAS. And a lot of their more modern software and the GUI and the applications you use, these will support you, even though that CPU is not graphically embedded. It's definitely a big step up from the Atom that the Synology were using before, and this isn't the first rodeo for QNAP utilizing an AMD processor. They're already using a non-embedded AMD processor in the previous generation, so for them this is their second, potentially even third gen of the non-embedded processors in their systems. Now, alongside that processor, it also opens up the door to DDR4 memory, and both of these brands have gone a very different direction in terms of that. First and foremost, it's worth highlighting, although they're both using DDR4 2400 MHz memory, the Synology arrives with ECC memory. And that error code correction memory, or again, ECC changes definition depending on where you look around, the ECC memory will check data as it passes through the memory and repair or heal that data as it passes through. Something that a lot of people have to pay extra for on ECC. It's got that extra little chip on each of the memory modules passing it through it. But after that, things get a little bit different between them, because not only does the QNAP not use ECC memory, it doesn't even use the same kind of memory, with the QNAP arriving with long DIMM memory utilization, and again, that supports up to 64 gig, 4 gig on day one on both of these devices, but the QNAP supports up to 64 gig of UDIMM memory, ECC as well, but it doesn't arrive with ECC. The Synology uses SODIMM up to 32 gig on 2 memory slots. So both units arrive with a single 4 gig module, but again, the way in which you approach memory in the architecture of your storage, you're going to have different instincts here, because 64 gig of memory when it comes to virtualization, when it comes to surveillance, when it comes to widespread simultaneous access of users and applications, is going to be highly desirable. However, 32 gig is still a hell of a lot of memory to be playing with. And remember, this Ryzen processor, if you're going to run VMs internally, not just be a targeted storage for the likes of VMware, then 32 gig is still more than enough to be getting on with. And ECC, I might add, is still very, very impressive memory nonetheless. And although it is generally considered to be more enterprise as an architecture of memory, it's great that it's here available at the SMB level. So in terms of internal hardware and the main core CPU and memory, I've got to say it is a flat out tie for me, not only because they got the same processor, but also because both of the ways they've proceeded in memory and RAM utilization and availability and upgradability to the end user is different enough that there's a targeted market for both, so we can't really give an advantage to either one. In fact, in terms of design, you can't really choose between one or the other either. They're both incredibly similar. One could argue the ventilation on the Synology is a little bit better there on the front panel. For those that aren't aware, rack mount devices use very much a horizontal cooling method, because they're going to be stacked in potentially closed rack cabinets or even the pillar cabinet systems on rails. It's worth highlighting that these devices have to have cooling measures front and back for the air to pass through, with active cooling on the rear and sometimes in between. So on the Synology, if we look at the front panel there, we can see just there at the top, that little vented panel along the top. There's the LEDs, there's lockable trays, but there's that vented front panel at the top to assist air passing all the way through. The trays themselves have a tiny little vent panel there at the base, but that vent panel at the top is still pretty nice. Now on the QNAP, we don't have that vent panel, but we have ventilation built into the framework between each of those bays, and the trays have more ventilation based around them. So again, the placement of cooling systems on these devices is very different indeed. There's a few hallmark QNAP things that are just not on this, things that you may have heard about the QNAP brand, such as the KVM support of an HDMI out, the utilization of an LCD panel. This system doesn't have that, so we can't really factor those into this comparison. But in terms of cooling, once again, they've gone a slightly different direction on how they want the system to maintain core efficient internal temperature. Now next we're going to talk about ports and connections. We're going to flip these two around. We're going to make all kinds of noise on that mic. We're going to have a little look about what these two bring to the table in terms of connectivity. Because once again, they have gone a very different way indeed. Now, we can look on both of these devices and we can already see even the placement of ventilation and cooling differs greatly with the Synology, going with cooling on either side. And obviously PSUs have their own cooling system built in with their own fans internally. Whereas on the QNAP, they've gone far more central there because of the placement of the PSU and that PCIe upgrade slot there. Now, let's talk about what they got in common straight away. They've both got USB factored onto the rear there. They've both got the redundant power supplies. In both cases, the standalone unit arrives with 250 watts PSUs in the single PSU version, and in the dual PSU version, the QNAP arrives with two 300 watts and the Synology with 2 times 350 watts. But both of them have got those PSUs included in the warranty. Both of them allow you to remove the PSU very easily. So again, in the event that you have a hardware failure, these PSUs can be removed. You don't even need to power down the device because the other PSU will help you out. And you can send these off under warranty or keep a replacement in-house so you can make sure that your system is not offline. Now, if we carry on looking at these connections, let's try and bring those there so the light can make them out, because there's no way I'm lifting both of these up. We can have a look at the network connections, because the network connections is another area where these two devices differ quite wildly. Now the Synology has 4 network connections at 1 GBE each that support link aggregation, and that link aggregation on these devices will allow the porting of the truncating of them together with load balancing and stuff like that. Mind you, that's a more term-based thing, but ultimately to allow you up to 400 megabytes per second throughput externally on this device. Now the QNAP on the other hand has only got the 2 network ports, but these network ports are 2.5 GBE, so individually 250 megs or a combined 500 megs. But again, how you go ahead with that is going to rely a lot on your network capabilities, what switches you're using, what upgrades you're going for, and there are a lot more 2.5 GBE solutions out there, not just from QNAP themselves. And 2.5 GBE is, I think, it should be the long-term replacement of 1G. It makes no sense to me that 1G still exists in this network right now, where internet speeds are starting to surpass the internal network bandwidth in a lot of home and business environments, and therefore creating a weird truncation within office environments, and if ultimately it means that NAS is losing a battle there against cloud providers because of it, which is foolish to me. But again, we can't really give one system an advantage over the other in terms of that network capability, because 4 ports may be advantageous for those that want to utilize failover, but it's still 1 GBE, and 2.5 GBE and that potential 5G is as good as it is and as significantly faster and noticeably faster per port and overall of the QNAP has to be said. You have to make sure you have the network architecture to take advantage of it. Now, the next 2 areas on this comparison are definitely things that we should focus on as each brand and the way they move forward, because it's quite important. The USB ports on this device here are largely only used for UPSs, for external storage, very low-level devices that you can make network accessible or assign them to a VM. In terms of expandability, the RS1221 Plus utilizes eSATA and supports the RX418 expansion chassis, adding 4 drives of expandability to your 8-bay solution. However, on the QNAP, this is where things are very, very different, and I would argue better in a number of ways. So first and foremost, you've got USB as well, but you've got 4 ports that cover USB 3.2 Gen 1 and USB 3.2 Gen 2. Only Gen 1 on the Synology at 5 gigabit. So these devices here support between them a combination of 5 gigabit Ethernet and 10 gigabit Ethernet on respective ports, covering USB A and C. Not only that, but you can support the external storage that we just discussed. You can support UPSs and all those hardware devices, but you can also support a wide range of expansion chassis. This device has a lot more expansion options available for rack mount that cover USB and PCIe expansions as well, that allow you to bolster your storage a great deal more than just the 4 bays on the Synology, and it certainly gives it a noticeable advantage in terms of long-term storage capabilities in your system's life. And I do think that is worthy of note, particularly for those of you that like to have a USB backup or a USB backup rack that you want to back up your storage to. The idea of that in combination with USB 3.2 Gen 2 and that 10 or 1000 megabytes per second throughput is going to make backups considerably faster. So again, got to give QNAP an advantage there in terms of storage capability and in USB upgradability. From there, we can look at both of these devices and their PCIe upgradability. Now, both of these devices have got PCIe slots. Both of them arriving with a PCIe Gen 3 ×8 slot, so a potential 8,000 megabytes per second throughput between the connected card and the PCIe equipped system. So again, you can install 10G, you can install dual port 10G, you can install fiber channel, you can install combo cards. And on the subject of combo cards, we can talk about how both of these individual systems allow that M2 NVMe upgradability. So both brands have their own dedicated range of M2 NVMe only upgrade cards, and again, arguably there are more cards available on the QNAP platform. If we look at the Synology platform, chiefly there are upgrades of network interface cards at 1 and 2 port, but in terms of taking advantage of both systems together, we have the Synology E10M20 Ti. It's a 10 GBE and 2 times M2 NVMe cache card. It allows you to have 2 of those PCIe Gen 3 ×4 SSDs and that 10 GBE port, and it is a PCIe Gen 3 ×8 card. That means potential 8,000 megs throughput to be shared between the 2 NVMe's and the 10G. That's a lot of bandwidth to play with. Now, on the QNAP side, they have a wider range of cards in their QM2 series. They've also got a wide range of 10 GBE, 25 GBE, 40 GBE, or even lesser 2.5 GBE upgrade cards. They've also got M2 upgrade cards, M2 NVMe upgrade cards, 2 and 4 port cards. But they also have their combo card. But weirdly, their combo card, all those cards I've just mentioned seem to be larger bandwidth than this. This is a PCIe Gen 2 ×4 card. It has active cooling on board. It has 2 NVMe SSD bays on board, and it has a 10 GBE port there. But it only has 2,000 megs throughput to play with between it and the connected device. So again, this card inside here won't even nearly take advantage of all the bandwidth available to you in that PCIe card. There are loads of other upgrade cards that take advantage of PCIe Gen 3 ×4, Gen 3 ×8 from their range, but the current only combo card is that one there that has 2 ×4 capability, and I'm really hoping they upgrade that card pretty soon, because 10 GB upgradability on a system like this, you've got 8 bays, you can saturate that connection with even mid-range drives, some pros, or some of those enterprise ones that we talked about earlier. But more moving forward from that, we can talk about how the system takes advantage of those PCIe, because suddenly QNAP again will pull forward, because even though their combo card is of lesser architecture of PCIe, it has to be said that one, the QNAP system allows you to use NVMe and M2 SSD on these cards for both caching and raw storage, something the Synology does not provide. You can only use those M2 NVMe's for caching. That is your lot. Also, this QNAP arrive, or it doesn't arrive, but as an optional extra, you can get a PCIe adapter that will turn that one PCIe Gen 3x8 slot into two PCIe Gen 3x8 slots. So you can have two upgrade cards, something that's just not possible here on the Synology, and that will allow you to have a dedicated NVMe card and a dedicated 10G card, with each of those cards having a potential 4,000 megs each. That's when you can get around that bandwidth limitation of this combo card in question. But of course, this is an additional purchase, and as mentioned at the top of the video, a QNAP is noticeably more expensive. So again, where that fits in your architecture and how you take advantage of it is really up to you and your scalability long term. The QNAP has far more ways in which it can be upgraded in its hardware lifespan, and I haven't even got onto the fact that their range of PCIe upgrade cards is so much larger in compatibility. You can install a small range of graphics cards inside this that can be utilized in HD Station and virtualization and general system utilization in a number of ways to improve the graphical performance of this, and thereby getting around the fact that CPU isn't embedded graphics. It does have a number of different upgrades. It has a number of different larger tier upgrades, like the memory mentioned earlier on, and it does have the option of a number of things that Synology has, but it doesn't have them included. And I think that's the balancing act in terms of hardware, because as mentioned, QNAP generally get there first on a number of hardware systems. They get to the market first and they produce their solution first. But Synology at the background spend a bit more time honing it, rounding off the edges, and bring, I would say, an arguably more slick, branded, more Apple-like solution, with the QNAP standing in that position of the Android market, the more Windows market, a little bit more experimental sometimes, but ultimately a far more customizable and open solution to a number of you out there. And this can be extended to that software too. We're not going to talk too much about software, because a lot of you watching this video have already watched me sing lyrical about the software on both of these platforms as it is, with DSM and QTS. DSM currently in 6.2 with 7 in beta, hopefully coming out in full by the summer, has a wide range of software abilities to replace a lot of the third-party applications from the likes of Microsoft, from like things like Skype, replaced by their own chat application. You've got applications to replace a lot of the products and services from Google, and you've got migration tools that allow you to synchronize with those cloud platforms too, in terms of Synology's virtual machine manager application for VM importing, exporting and backing up. You've got Active Backup Suite for that multi-tiered backup approach, and again the collaboration suite of chat, mail, Office, Drive. Then you've got Surveillance Station as well, with 2 camera licenses included. It is a very contained, very polished, very slick software application that's included with this purchase. The QNAP side of things has QTS, which arrived in ext4. I should have touched on the Synology also has BTRFS and Synology Hybrid RAID that we talked about before, but the QNAP has QTS, the ext4 based application that they have there, that file system it runs on. But the hardware architecture in this, as I understand it, is more than likely going to allow you down the line to install ZFS. We're seeing lots of QNAP systems with this architecture arriving with QUTS Hero, the ZFS file system, with all of the advantages that that brings. The same architecture that's inside this is being upgraded with all of those. So it's more than likely that this system will embrace and allow ZFS as a file system later in the year. On top of that, their applications are far more customizable. QTS has the tiniest bit of a learning curve higher than the Synology side, but the Synology side is designed for anyone to be able to use. The QNAP side helps you along the way with lots of help and guides, but if you even have a modicum of IT knowledge, you should be absolutely fine. On top of that, there is a huge range of applications from the first party, with a lot more stuff to do with migrating and cloud gateway and hybrid mount and virtual JBOD. On top of that, they have got not only their own range of applications in the first party, but a greater degree of support of third-party apps as well, with the integration of Office 365 in all of their file handling, so you can open docs and spreadsheets and PPTXs and stuff like that, all within the applications and services. You've also got a wider range of codecs supported with Cyan Player built in as well. In terms of surveillance, they have got QVR Pro, the 8 camera license application that, although isn't quite as swish as Synology Surveillance Station application, which is still for me the best surveillance application on NAS. It's pretty darn close, and with 8 camera licenses, that's a tremendous saving of hundreds of pounds to exceed the 2 camera license limit. There are several surveillance applications on it, and in terms of virtualization, you've also got support of Ubuntu station there with the ability to run a Linux VM in 3 clicks. You can download a Windows VM in about 4 clicks, and their VM application, and indeed their backup application, I would argue is better across the 2 brands in Virtualization Station and Hybrid Backup Sync 3. What I'm saying is, much like my other videos when I talk about Windows versus Mac, or Android versus iOS, or when I talk about console gaming versus PC gaming, the Synology is the more slick product. It is arguably with a lower glass ceiling in some ways, but it is still a fantastic product for those of you that want an all-encompassing solution, and you want to buy a product and absorb its ecostructure. Make sure it's software, and when you pay for the price tag, that you're getting that software for within your business needs. It includes all of that, and that is a big part of why people buy Synology, not just the RS1221 Plus, but just generally investing in the brand as a whole. The QNAP platform, on the other hand, is a far more customizable platform that works around you and your setup. It arrives with lots of software and a lot of potential for upgradability in its lifetime, with an arguably higher glass ceiling than that of the Synology. But that little extra learning curve may put some people off, and the upgradability of this system in its lifespan may be intimidating for some, but incredibly advantageous for others. It just comes down to you being the buyer and what you're looking for in your business storage solution. So, whichever one of these 2 devices sounds like the most appealing to you based on this comparison, take my word for it, that's probably the one you should go for. But go to the comments. There's a link there to NAS Compares, where we've broken down lots of reviews on these devices, but also there's links to my help section where I can basically walk you through the right solution for you. There's a free advice section. It's impartial. It's unbiased. Again, it's not made for profit. It's just there to help people. It's not the quickest. I'll be honest. It takes maybe a day or 2 to get a response, but I will help you choose the right solution for your storage needs. Just head there to the free advice section on NAS Compares. If you've enjoyed this video, click like. If you want to learn more, click subscribe, and I will see you next time.